Hi folks, and welcome to Applying the Sword. I'm Micah Pilcher. Two of my favorite hobbies happen to be studying politics and studying the Civil War. Of course, I don't think you can really study the Civil War without studying politics. That being said, a few months ago I was at the home of a Virginian preacher, and we were just shooting the breeze, and somehow the conversation turned to the Civil War. Everybody I talk to wants to talk about the Civil War. He asked the question to me why I thought that the Christian side, the South, lost the Civil War. Of course, when he said that, he's referring to the fact that the South was the Bible Belt, that it had famous Christians like Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson in positions of high command, and it was common knowledge even at that time that the North had a more open mind to ideas like transcendentalism, things like that. Well, I kind of ignored the bias of the question, and I'm not going to address the issue today as to who was right in that war or who was the more Christian side. They both had saints and sinners. It kind of struck on a more broad question, I thought. And so I ignored the bias, and I went ahead and let him assume for the second that the South was right and that it was Christian. And I gave him the answer that I had given myself when I had asked myself similar questions about similar conflicts throughout history or even in your personal life. And I said, well, sir, I think the answer is because God is not a Confederate or a Federal or a Democrat or a Republican, a Libertarian, a Socialist, a Communist, a Labor, or a Tory. He's a monarch. He has an actual, physical, tangible kingdom. He himself holds an office. He has an actual, physical, tangible capital. And he has subjects. And he has laws. And he will enforce those laws with a rod of iron. And I challenge you to check me on the scripture with this one. I think I can say every single thing that he does pertains to that kingdom. Even evangelism is recruiting citizens for his kingdom and taking them from the Satan's kingdom. This is necessary to remember in light of the fact that we Christians who love to get involved in politics must remember at the end of the day that this kingdom, this United States, whatever kingdom we happen to be part of, whatever nation, is finite. It will not be here forever. It's as finite as the earth is finite. One of my favorite quotes from the Civil War is Abraham Lincoln's, who made the comment during 1862, "In the present Civil War, it is quite possible that God's purpose is something different from the purpose of either party, and yet the human instrumentalities working just as they do are the best adaptation to effect his purpose." I think Honest Abe hit it right on the head there. You see, when human beings start a conflict, whether that be on the epic scale of nation versus nation, or whether it be two people fighting, they draw the lines as they see it. That's just naturally what we do. We don't necessarily ally ourselves with God. Another good Abraham Lincoln quote that beautifully illustrates this is when he says, "My concern is not whether God is on our side. My greatest concern is to be on God's side, for God is always right." It would do us so much good if in every one of the conflicts that we get involved, we ask ourselves that question. Unfortunately, in political circles, we don't get to draw the lines. The politicians do. The politicians don't always have our best interest in mind, and they certainly don't have God's best interest in mind. And so I can't say what political party a person ought to ally himself with, and I'm certainly not going to say that if the one I think is best loses, that the wrong side lost, or that the wrong side won. Now, I think it is definitely important that Christians get involved in politics. Obviously, if we don't, who else is going to? And no non-Christian is going to push biblical agenda. But at the end of the day, God has a kingdom He's investing in. And while He does care what happens to us and what does happen to the United States, if a sparrow cannot fall without His notice, how can an empire rise without His aid, as Ben Franklin would say. So He cares about politics. He cares about the affairs of nations, but at the end of the day, every single one of these conflicts are but a skirmish in nations that aren't necessarily His. So I would urge my fellow Christians, yes, you should be involved in politics, but don't act like your side is God's side, okay? God has a kingdom, and He doesn't ask for your vote, but He does ask that you bow the knee. Because you don't vote for kings, you bow before them. All right, folks, well, you have a good day, and God bless.